Ladies and gentlemen, the Vice President of the United States.
Thank you. Thank you. Secretary Mattis, Secretary Tillerson, members of the Cabinet, members of Congress, members of the armed forces and law enforcement community from across this country, good afternoon, and thank you all for being here. As President Donald Trump articulates his vision to put the national security of America first, President Trump has no higher priority than the safety and security of the American people. And since the outset of our administration, he's worked tirelessly to make America stronger and safer than ever before. President Trump knows that American strength and security depends on a vibrant and growing economy. That's why this president has championed free and fair trade. He's rolled back federal red tape in record numbers. He's unleashed American energy. And under President Trump's leadership this week, Congress will pass the largest tax cut in American history. But to ensure the safety and security of the American people, our president has been working tirelessly from the first day of this administration, defending our borders, enforcing our laws, removing dangerous illegal criminals from our streets. And illegal crossings at our southern border are already down by more than 50%. Under President Trump's leadership, we're also rebuilding our military and making the strongest fighting force in history stronger still. The president has already signed the largest increase in defense spending in nearly a decade. And just last week, President Donald Trump signed into law one of the largest investments in our national defense since the days of Ronald Reagan. With renewed American leadership, we're achieving real results on the international stage. Our NATO allies are paying more toward our common defense. North Korea is isolated as never before. This president's put Iran on notice, and he's put the war in Afghanistan on a path to victory. And thanks to the leadership of our commander-in-chief and the courage of our armed forces, ISIS is on the run, their capital has fallen, and their so-called caliphate has crumbled across Syria and Iraq. In less than a year, President Trump has made enormous progress to promote peace through American strength. And today, President Trump will take another crucial step to ensure the safety and security of our country far into the future, as he announces to the American people and to our allies and adversaries across the wider world a national security strategy that puts America first. So with gratitude for his unwavering commitment to make America safe again, it is now my high honor and distinct privilege to introduce to you the 45th President of the United States of America, President Donald Trump.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, please. I want to thank Vice President Pence, along with the many members of my cabinet here with us today. I also want to thank all of the dedicated professionals, military, civilian, and law enforcement, who devote their lives to serving our nation. In particular, I want to recognize General Dunford and the members of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. In addition, we are honored to be joined by House Majority Leader Kevin McCarthy, Homeland Security Chairman Mike McCall, and Senate Majority Whip John Cornyn. Thank you very much. Thank you for being here. Thank you. Thank you. Let me begin by expressing our deepest sympathies and most heartfelt prayers for the victims of the train derailment in Washington State. We are closely monitoring the situation and coordinating with local authorities. It is all the more reason why we must start immediately fixing the infrastructure of the United States. We're here today to discuss matters of vital importance to us all: America's security, prosperity, and standing in the world. I want to talk about where we've been, where we are now, and finally, our strategy for where we are going in the years ahead. Over the past 11 months, I have traveled tens of thousands of miles to visit 13 countries. I have met with more than 100 world leaders. I have carried America's message to a grand hall in Saudi Arabia, a great square in Warsaw, to the General Assembly of the United Nations, and to the seat of democracy on the Korean Peninsula. Everywhere I traveled, it was my highest privilege and greatest honor to represent the American people. Throughout our history, the American people have always been the true source of American greatness. Our people have promoted our culture and promoted our values. Americans have fought and sacrificed on the battlefields all over the world. We have liberated captive nations, transformed former enemies into the best of friends, and lifted entire regions of the planet from poverty to prosperity. Because of our people, America has been among the greatest forces for peace and justice in the history of the world. The American people are generous. You are determined, you are brave, you are strong, and you are wise. When the American people speak, all of us should listen. And just over 1 year ago, you spoke loud and you spoke clear. On November 8th, 2016, you voted to make America great again. You embrace new leadership and very new strategies, and also a glorious new hope. That is why we are here today. But to seize the opportunities of the future, we must first understand the failures of the past. For many years, our citizens watched as Washington politicians presided over one disappointment after another. To many of our leaders, so many, who forgot whose voices they were to respect and whose interests they were supposed to defend. Our leaders in Washington negotiated disastrous trade deals that brought massive profits to many foreign nations, but sent thousands of American factories and millions of American jobs to those other countries. Our leaders engaged in nation building abroad while they failed to build up and replenish our nation at home. They undercut and shortchanged our men and women in uniform with inadequate resources, unstable funding, and unclear missions. They failed to insist that our often very wealthy allies pay their fair share for defense, putting a massive and unfair burden on the U.S. taxpayer and our great U.S. military. They neglected a nuclear menace in North Korea, made a disastrous, weak, and incomprehensibly bad deal with Iran, and allowed terrorists such as ISIS to gain control of vast parts of territory all across the Middle East. They put American energy under lock and key. They imposed punishing regulations and crippling taxes. They surrendered our sovereignty to foreign bureaucrats in faraway and distant capitals. And over the profound objections of the American people, our politicians left our borders wide open. Millions of immigrants entered illegally. Millions more were admitted into our country without the proper vetting needed to protect our security and our economy. Leaders in Washington imposed on the country an immigration policy that Americans never voted for, never asked for, and never approved. A policy where the wrong people are allowed into our country and the right people are rejected. American citizens, as usual, have been left to bear the cost and to pick up the tab. On top of everything else, our leaders drifted from American principles. They lost sight of America's destiny, and they lost their belief in American greatness. As a result, our citizens lost something as well. The people lost confidence in their government and eventually even lost confidence in their future. But last year, all of that began to change. The American people rejected the failures of the past. You rediscovered your voice and reclaimed ownership of this nation and its destiny. On January 20th, 2017, I stood on the steps of the Capitol to herald the day the people became the rulers of their nation again. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Now, less than 1 year later, I am proud to report that the entire world has heard the news and has already seen the signs. America is coming back, and America is coming back strong. Upon my inauguration, I announced that the United States would return to a simple principle. The first duty of our government is to serve its citizens, many of whom have been forgotten. But they are not forgotten anymore. With every decision and every action, we are now putting America first. We are rebuilding our nation, our confidence, and our standing in the world. We have moved swiftly to confront our challenges, and we have confronted them head on. We are once again investing in our defense, almost $700 billion, a record this coming year. We are demanding extraordinary strength, which will hopefully lead to long and extraordinary peace. We are giving our courageous military men and women the support they need and so dearly deserve. We have withdrawn the United States from job-killing deals such as the Trans-Pacific Partnership and the very expensive and unfair Paris Climate Accord. And on our trip to Asia last month, I announced that we will no longer tolerate trading abuse. We have established strict new vetting procedures to keep terrorists out of the United States, and our vetting is getting tougher each month. To counter Iran and block its path to a nuclear weapon, I sanctioned the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps for its support of terrorism, and I declined to certify the Iran deal to Congress. Following my trip to the Middle East, the Gulf states and other Muslim-majority nations joined together to fight radical Islamist ideology and terrorist financing. We have dealt ISIS one devastating defeat after another. The coalition to defeat ISIS has now recaptured almost 100% of the land once held by these terrorists in Iraq and in Syria. Great job. Great job. Really good. Really good. Thank you. Thank you. We have a great military. We're now chasing them wherever they flee, and we will not let them into the United States. In Afghanistan, our troops are no longer undermined by artificial timelines, and we no longer tell our enemies of our plans. We are beginning to see results on the battlefield, and we have made clear to Pakistan that while we desire continued partnership, we must see decisive action against terrorist groups operating on their territory. And we make massive payments every year to Pakistan. They have to help. Our efforts to strengthen the NATO alliance set the stage for significant increases in member contributions, with tens of billions of dollars more pouring in, because I would not allow member states to be delinquent in the payment while we guarantee their safety and are willing to fight wars for them. We have made clear that countries that are immensely wealthy should reimburse the United States for the cost of defending them. This is a major departure from the past, but a fair and necessary one. Necessary for our country, necessary for our taxpayer, necessary for our own thought process. Our campaign of maximum pressure on the North Korean regime has resulted in the toughest ever sanctions. We have united our allies in an unprecedented effort to isolate North Korea. However, there is much more work to do. America and its allies will take all necessary steps to achieve a denuclearization and ensure that this regime cannot threaten the world. Thank you. This situation should have been taken care of long before I got into office, when it was much easier to handle. But it will be taken care of. We have no choice. At home, we are keeping our promises and liberating the American economy. We have created more than 2 million jobs since the election. Unemployment is at a 17-year low. The stock market is at an all-time high, and just a little while ago hit yet another all-time high, the 85th time since my election. We have cut 22 regulations for every one new regulation, the most in the history of our country. We have unlocked America's vast energy resources. As the world watches, and the world is indeed watching, we are days away from passing historic tax cuts for American families and businesses. It will be the biggest tax cut and tax reform in the history of our country. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. And we are seeing the response we fully expected. Economic growth has topped 3% for 2 quarters in a row. GDP growth, which is way ahead of schedule under my administration, will be one of America's truly greatest weapons. Optimism has surged. Confidence has returned. With this new confidence, we are also bringing back clarity to our thinking. We are reasserting these fundamental truths. A nation without borders is not a nation. A nation that does not protect prosperity at home cannot protect its interests abroad. A nation that is not prepared to win a war is a nation not capable of preventing a war. A nation that is not proud of its history cannot be confident in its future. And a nation that is not certain of its values cannot summon the will to defend them. Today, grounded in these truths, we are presenting to the world our new national security strategy. Based on my direction, this document has been in development for over a year. It has the endorsement of my entire cabinet. Our new strategy is based on a principled realism, guided by our vital national interests and rooted in our timeless values. This strategy recognizes that whether we like it or not, we are engaged in a new era of competition. We accept that vigorous military, economic, and political contests are now playing out all around the world. We face rogue regimes that threaten the United States and our allies. We face terrorist organizations, transnational criminal networks, and others who spread violence and evil around the globe. We also face rival powers, Russia and China, that seek to challenge American influence, values, and wealth. We will attempt to build a great partnership with those and other countries, but in a manner that always protects our national interest. As an example, yesterday I received a call from President Putin of Russia thanking our country for the intelligence that our CIA was able to provide them concerning a major terrorist attack planned in St. Petersburg, where many people, perhaps in the thousands, could have been killed. They were able to apprehend these terrorists before the event with no loss of life, and that's a great thing, and the way it's supposed to work. That is the way it's supposed to work. But while we seek such opportunities of cooperation, we will stand up for ourselves, and we will stand up for our country like we have never stood up before. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. We know that American success is not a foregone conclusion. It must be earned, and it must be won. Our rivals are tough. They're tenacious and committed to the long term, but so are we. To succeed, we must integrate every dimension of our national strength, and we must compete with every instrument of our national power. Under the Trump administration, America is gaining wealth, leading to enhanced power faster than anyone thought, with $6 trillion more in the stock market alone since the election. $6 trillion. With the strategy I am announcing today, we are declaring that America is in the game and America is going to win. Our strategy, thank you. Our strategy advances four vital national interests. First, we must protect the American people, the homeland, and our great American way of life. This strategy recognizes that we cannot secure a nation if we do not secure our borders. So for the first time ever, American strategy now includes a serious plan to defend our homeland. It calls for the construction of a wall on our southern border, ending chain migration and the horrible visa and lottery programs, closing loopholes that undermine enforcement, and strongly supporting our Border Patrol agents, ICE officers, and Homeland Security personnel. In addition, our strategy calls for us to confront, discredit, and defeat radical Islamic terrorism and ideology, and to prevent it from spreading into the United States. And we will develop new ways to counter those who use new domains such as cyber and social media to attack our nation or threaten our society. The second pillar of our strategy is to promote American prosperity. For the first time, American strategy recognizes that economic security is national security. Economic vitality, growth, and prosperity at home is absolutely necessary for American power and influence abroad. Any nation that trades away its prosperity for security will end up losing both. That is why this national security strategy emphasizes more than ever before the critical steps we must take to ensure the prosperity of our nation for a long, long time to come. It calls for cutting taxes and rolling back unnecessary regulations. It calls for trade based on the principles of fairness and reciprocity. It calls for firm action against unfair trade practices and intellectual property theft. And it calls for new steps to protect our national security, industrial, and innovation base. The strategy proposes a complete rebuilding of American infrastructure, our roads, bridges, airports, waterways, and communications infrastructure. And it embraces a future of American energy dominance and self-sufficiency. The third pillar of our strategy is to preserve peace through strength. We recognize that weakness is the surest path to conflict, and unrivaled power is the most certain means of defense. For this reason, our strategy breaks from the damaging defense sequester. We're going to get rid of that. It calls for a total modernization of our military and reversing previous decisions to shrink our armed forces, even as threats to national security grew. It calls for streamlining acquisition, eliminating bloated bureaucracy, and massively building up our military, which has the fundamental side benefit of creating millions and millions of jobs. This strategy includes plans to counter modern threats, such as cyber and electromagnetic attacks. It recognizes space as a competitive domain and calls for multi-layered missile defense. This strategy outlines important steps to address new forms of conflict, such as economic and political aggression. And our strategy emphasizes strengthening alliances to cope with these threats. It recognizes that our strength is magnified by allies who share principles and our principles and shoulder their fair share of responsibility for our common security. Fourth and finally, our strategy is to advance American influence in the world. But this begins with building up our wealth and power at home. America will lead again. We do not seek to impose our way of life on anyone, but we will champion the values without apology. We want strong alliances and partnerships based on cooperation and reciprocity. We will make new partnerships with those who share our goals and make common interests into a common cause. We will not allow inflexible ideology to become an obsolete and obstacle to peace. We will pursue the vision we have carried around the world over this past year, a vision of strong, sovereign, and independent nations that respect their citizens and respect their neighbors. Nations that thrive in commerce and cooperation, rooted in their histories and branching out toward their destinies. That is the future we wish for this world, and that is the future we seek in America. Thank you. With this strategy, we are calling for a great reawakening of America, a resurgence of confidence, and a rebirth of patriotism, prosperity, and pride. And we are returning to the wisdom of our founders. In America, the people govern, the people rule, and the people are sovereign. What we have built here in America is precious and unique. In all of history, never before has freedom reigned, the rule of law prevailed, and the people thrived as we have here for nearly 250 years. We must love and defend it. We must guard it with vigilance and spirit, and if necessary, like so many before us, with our very lives. And we declare that our will is renewed, our future is regained, and our dreams are restored. Every American has a role to play in this grand national effort. And today I invite every citizen to take their part in our vital mission. Together, our task is to strengthen our families, to build up our communities, to serve our citizens, and to celebrate American greatness as a shining example to the world. As long as we are proud, and very proud of who we are, how we got here, and what we are fighting for to preserve, we will not fail. If we do all of this, if we rediscover our resolve and commit ourselves to compete and win again, then together we will leave our children and our grandchildren a nation that is stronger, better, freer, prouder, and yes, an America that is greater than ever before. God bless you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you.
President Donald Trump declaring America first, peace through strength, and of course make America great again as he outlines a new national security strategy right across town here in Washington. Hi everyone, I'm ABC News political director Rick Klein, joined by Tara Palmieri, our White House correspondent, Mary Alice Parks, senior political reporter. We've also got Ali Rogan up on Capitol Hill, but I want to start with Louis Martinez, our man at the Pentagon. Louis, this is required by law to give these periodic updates, the national security strategy. What stuck out to you in what President Trump had to say today, and did he stake out any new policy ground?
Well, number one, Rick, look at the ceremony behind this event. This typically doesn't happen where you have a rollout of a strategy in this fashion, where the president comes out, lays out his point by point, his vision for how the strategy is going to tie into American prosperity. That's one of the things that struck out to me, the linkages that President Trump was making about how it is important for the national security strategy to be linked to advancements on the home front, the economic prosperity that he talked towards the end there. One of the things that he also mentioned was the economy. That's one thing that jumped out at me. He talked about, at one point, one of the 4 pillars of this new strategy, which is advancing U.S. prosperity. He talked about the importance of improving America's infrastructure. He talked about how that ties into improvements here at home, and then that leads to stronger stability and security overseas. So one of the things also that we see in this is that you've got this the reaffirmation of the 4 goals here, the protecting the homeland, enhancing U.S. prosperity, preserving peace through strength, which was an applause line there at this event, and the last pillar here was advancing American influence worldwide. So those are the cornerstones of this new strategy that he's rolling out. But if you've been listening to the president over the last year or so, some common themes that you've heard: America first, cooperating through reciprocity from our allies overseas. So it's, in some way, it's more of reaffirmation of the line that the president has taken over the past year or so.
And Tara, a lot of this was packaging domestic priorities for a national strategic audience. We heard a lot about immigration.
Right.
We heard a lot about trade deals. We know those are big priorities. We heard a lot about tax cuts even. How that was somehow linked here with the national security strategy.
They're trying to make the argument that economic strength is international strength. And, you know, the phrase used to be speak softly and carry a big stick. Trump has more likely built up the military. That's his stick, but also screaming about, America first. I also thought that his tone today was really interesting. It mirrored a bit of the tax speech he had last week. It was a softer, more resolute, serious tone. And, from aides that I've spoken with, they say that Trump is really starting to learn the importance of leading through rhetoric. And that is something that, throughout time, we've seen that from our leaders, and it's something that he perhaps didn't value as much in the beginning, and that's why you're seeing, these kind of speeches when he comes home from trips, and he's a bit more measured than he usually is.
Cecilia Vega up at the White House, joining us now from the White House North Lawn. Cecilia, what did you make of this speech? Did you detect any new policy here? How does this rank with other strategic and policy speeches we've seen from the president?
No new policy that I caught, Rick. But I got to say, it really struck me as perhaps a trial run for his State of the Union speech, is what it sounded like. We heard the president, and forgive me if you guys have talked about this already. I didn't hear the top of the broadcast, but we heard him talk a lot about the election repeatedly, multiple references to the election and tax cuts, and what he would say is his list of accomplishments over the last 11 months. So I guess. What is interesting and what is new in this is this declaring border security, as he said, for the first time ever, part of the nation's strategic national security interest. He talked about putting the wall up. He talked about supporting Border Patrol and ending visa lottery programs and chain migration. This was President Trump's greatest hits list, if you will, of his accomplishments, but also a little bit looking ahead. I agree with Tara. He felt very muted to me on this one. To me, what's most interesting about this is what happened behind the scenes leading up to this. From our reporting here at the White House, this is something that the president really wanted to do. He wanted to get out there and give this speech to the American public, to the world, is the way aides here at the White House put it. It's not something that other presidents have done in the past. This isn't usually an event filled with pomp and circumstance. This is a stamp document that is required by law of a White House to give to the Congress. Usually, there's no form, there's no ceremony around it. But this president wanted to come out here, like this president likes to do, with the flags and the military brass, and give a big speech on it.
A nation without borders is not a nation, he said. A rather dire portrait, I'd add also, Cecilia, that he's painting here. This is 11 months or so after the American Carnage speech that was his inaugural address, updating it a little bit, but still a pretty harsh on the state of the world that he inherited. Very, very difficult language for his predecessors and some of the problems that he views as them having avoided.
Yeah, and that is very Donald Trump, if you will, right? That's the tone that he likes to strike. That is the message of this presidency, America first. He wants to put the military first and has made no bones about that. A couple of other headlines that we should probably hit on here that he didn't mention but are part of this document. A difference from the Obama-era national security plan. Climate change is not considered under this administration a threat to national security. I believe Tara said it, though. The economy and economic interests are, and maintaining that stronghold in this world is part of this administration's goal number one. Also, China, calling China a strategic competitor here. That's a big shift for this White House too. So a couple of things in there are jumped out at me. Those are definitely among them. But I have to say this isn't a lot of news made. If we were going to give him a report card on that. But it really felt much more like a State of the Union practice run, and probably a report card that he would give to himself for the past year looking back.
Passing grades, I think, for some reason to think that for the president himself. Cecilia Vega, thanks for joining us from the White House. Get back to it. And Mary Alice, it did seem like he was unpacking a whole lot of policies, knitting them together in a strategy, I think maybe a little bit broader than we've heard from the president.
Right. It was much more aspirational than, as Cecilia said, a concrete list of new policies. A big focus on looking backwards, sort of a list of some accomplishments, though maybe not that many to tout for a first year. I mean, some strides against ISIS. He talked about international deals he's pulled out of, but a lot of folks argue that for one full year with with Republicans controlling this town, there might be very little to show. And I think the other big gap was Russia. The only time that Russia came up was actually sort of a complimentary tone. He talked about new partnerships and new allegiances and alliances with Russia. That is so different than the tone on Capitol Hill, where even Republicans are constantly talking about Russia as a threat, a concern, and a new priority for national security.
I did notice, though, that he touched on cyber and social security, social media security.
Right, so alluding to something.
Exactly, alluding to an investigation that he's not exactly a fan of, but yeah.
But not getting up there and saying outright that this is a threat to the United States.
Right.
Not hitting that directly. And Louis
he
Martinez
called them rival powers, though. So
rivals.
Exactly.
Way to put it. Yeah. So Louis Martinez over at the Pentagon, we heard the president talk about the need to enter the sequestration, and those automatic cuts to Pentagon spending, and say we're rebuilding the military. How do those lines go over, and how does it match up with reality, what we've seen over the last year?
Well, you know, sequestration is just something that's been hanging over the Pentagon now for almost 6 years. It's the constant refrain from senior officials. Sequestration is going to reduce the military's readiness. It's going to impact how we fight overseas, how we maintain the excellent level of our troops here stateside. And actually, what we constantly see is this dialogue between the Pentagon and the Congress. Get rid of sequestration. These automatic cuts are going to be permanently damaging to the U.S. military. So President Trump here kind of repeating the refrain that you always hear from Pentagon officials. And I think you really can't escape the reality that over the last 8 years or so, this drumbeat of continuing resolutions that we get from Congress, since they can't really pass a comprehensive or individual funding bills for the government, kind of puts the military in a strain, and they kind of have to operate at that strain while Congress debates when they move towards a final bill. So it's a very tough situation for the Pentagon over the last 6 years or so. And what you hear from the president here, I don't know if it's ever going to really resonate, because it's been going on for so many years now. To me here and others, it just becomes white noise.
Indeed. We also heard, guys, a little news of the day reference from the president today. Of course, we're following the story out of Washington State, and it's really a horrible situation. You've seen the pictures. We've heard reports of fatalities. The president's first reaction, guys, was to talk about how this shows the need for infrastructure reform. That tweet came out before any expression of solidarity or thoughts and prayers for family members. Intriguingly to me also, he didn't have a lot of money for train spending in his budget, but he's making this, again, a lot about his own agenda.
Right. And he basically got out ahead of the news. There's still a lot of conflicting reports about what might have caused this derailment. And I think it's important to remember that Washington State actually had invested a ton in infrastructure. Democrats have been pushing that charge. When the president was first elected, Democrats said it was the one area they were excited to work with this White House on. But it was Republicans on Capitol Hill that said they were not really interested in taking up that mantle because they weren't sure how to pay for it. So the fact that in the immediate aftermath of a tragedy like this, the president once again talking about infrastructure spending when his own party hasn't exactly been willing to go there, I think definitely raised some eyebrows.
Yeah, and it's going to be a busy week on Capitol Hill. The government shutdown is looming at the end of the week. Before they get, though, the hopes are very high for taxes. We heard the president again say they seem to be on the verge of what he's saying is the largest tax cut in American history. Lots of superlatives to unpack around that, but I want to get a reality check from Ali Rogan to give us a sense up on Capitol Hill of how things stand from here. We know that Senator McCain won't be around for votes, but we're still looking like a possibility of passage. What's the best guess right now in terms of the time frame from here?
Yeah, Rick, it's looking like we're going to get a new tax law by the end of the week, landing this bill on the president's desk. What we're hearing right now is that the House is going to take up this bill tomorrow with the goal of finishing up its votes sometime Tuesday afternoon. Then they're going to send it over to the Senate, where they could finish up work on this as soon as late Tuesday. It's likely that might bleed over into Wednesday, though. But you're right that on both sides, House and Senate, they have the votes to pass this. Senators are confident that even with the absence of Senator John McCain, who has said he will not be back in time for this vote, he's recuperating in Arizona, they still have the votes. So as it stands right now, there's nothing standing in Republicans' way for getting this on the president's desk by the end of the week.
Then there's the shutdown, which is the thing that's standing in the way of everyone's Christmas holiday. What is the what's the betting line right now, Ali, on what we're looking at before close of business Friday?
Yeah, that's right. We're 4 days away from the government potentially shutting down. Nobody is really talking seriously about that actually happening. It's just a matter of what deal is made between now and December 22nd. One of the big fault lines, of course, is defense spending, which the president just spoke about, talking about getting rid of that damaging sequester, which, by the way, newsflash, spoiler alert, they're not getting rid of the sequester anytime soon. Everybody agrees the sequester is terrible, and they don't like these across-the-board cuts to all of government, but nobody really knows, nobody wants to give up anything to fix it. So the big question is, how much defense spending do you put in this government funding agreement, which they want to cover a long term, at least longer than a few months, and how much domestic spending do you get in exchange for that? In addition, there's also a lot of end of the year fights, including around funding the children's health insurance program. We don't know exactly how that's going to shape up. But again, both sides here know that an actual shutdown would be politically perilous. Neither side is looking to actually make that happen, but it's a matter of how much they can get in terms of concessions. And again, we've got 4 days until they have to wrap this up.
All right, Ali Rogan, thank you from Capitol Hill. I want to hit just a couple of developments on the Mueller investigation and some of the weekend headlines that we saw. Really striking to see this effort begin to full gear to try to discredit Bob Mueller before he does any further action. Tara, what's your sense from the White House as they position around that with their lawyers for the transition team raising concerns?
It seems to me that they're really just pulling around looking for scraps, some way to really delegitimize the investigation. Honestly, the biggest hit that Mueller took was the firing of the 2 FBI agents who were obviously openly talking about their disdain for Trump, calling him an idiot, praising Hillary Clinton. One of them actually was involved in the investigation. I mean, the more that they can kind of paint the team as being partisan and biased and this being a political, investigation, that is something that they're going to keep doing. The idea that government emails can't be,
right,
subpoenaed is a little...
The transition, we're talking about
they would have been
transition
surprised
emails,
somehow about those ending up in the
Right.
investigators' hands. I thought it was interesting over the weekend listening to Republican lawmakers, even on our own show, continue that drumbeat about partisanship and partisan sort of politics in this investigation when we know that Mueller fired those 2 FBI agents as soon as those texts were at least in the public eye. So this idea of needing to clean house, if there's more cleaning up that needs to be done, I think is a really kind of tricky line for them to be touting right now, because it looks like he has cleaned house.
This is part of the Bannon playbook as well. I mean, he told Trump, slow down the investigation. This is what you need to do. Be slower about, handing over documents, question the motives that he's moving, make it more political, and this is exactly what they're doing. I mean, they're trying to slow down a rapidly expanding investigation.
And lawyers for the president meeting with the special counsel even this week. All right, that does it for our coverage today. Our thanks to Louis Martinez, Cecilia Vega, Ali Rogan. For Tara Palmieri and Mary Alice Parks, I'm Rick Klein. Stick around and watch us next time.